Welcome to OctoberPDFest online, and this session entitled Optimizing PDF for Print, Digital and Accessible Channels. I'm Tim Nelms from Crawford Technologies, and my co-presenter is Laurie Charlwood, and we're both speaking to you today from the United Kingdom. Our agenda today covers the kind of modern challenges that PDF is designed to solve in the fields of print, digital delivery and accessibility. And I think refreshingly, we're going to be spending most of the time today demonstrating how PDF can be tuned and optimized for those channels. So this is designed to be a very practical, hands-on session, and I really hope that this is going to equip you with new tools to help you understand more about PDF and improve your PDF workflows. At Crawford Tech, we tend to look at PDF through a particular perspective, and that perspective is one of customer communications and customer experience. And in particular, the kind of personalized, high-volume correspondence we all receive through our doors, like letters, statements, notices, and policy documents. And all the examples we're going to show you today are based on our practical day-to-day experience of helping our customers use PDF for delivering that kind of customer experience. Now, of course, with its heritage in PostScript, PDF is really well suited to high quality, high speed print workflows. And many of these kinds of workflows are moving away from traditional formats like AFP, Metacode, PostScript, PCL to PDF. But making that change isn't always easy, given the huge variety of composition tools and techniques that produce PDF output. And what we're going to show you are some of the common issues and how to go about solving those problems in print workflow. Now, no doubt everybody listening to this will have downloaded a bank statement or a piece of correspondence as PDF. And it's a very easy and natural extension to the way that PDF is used in printing. But the qualities that we value in print aren't always the same that we value in our digital documents, where we're interested in authenticity, in guarantees of longevity, and in storage density. And PDFA is a really important standard for long-term customer communication, archiving, and e-delivery, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. And finally, as the web matures and becomes a universal information medium, so have the standards and tools that make it accessible matured. And if you look at WCAG, HTML5, and of course PDF UA, they've made significant progress in ensuring that access to digital information doesn't present unacceptable barriers for people with disabilities. And once again, PDF has an important part to play by adding the kind of semantic richness to ensure that it can be read through assistive technology like screen readers and braille displays. Now, at Crawford Tech, we tend to view this challenge through the perspective of workflow. And it's through that kind of lens that we see common building blocks and common characteristics. So, for example, converting from one format to another, indexing it, decomposing and re-engineering it for new use cases requires very common tools and techniques. And actually, far from being independent workflows, these processes of printing and archiving and accessibility need to be considered as a whole. And actually, treatment of PDF needs to consider how it's going to be tuned and optimized for each of these use cases. And I think that requires a new thought process. And I term that thought process PDF as a platform. I hope by the end of the session today, you'll share that perspective on PDF. Now, what we have prepared today is a demonstration in 3 sections. So the first is all about poor PDF and converting poor PDF into well-structured, self-described, and optimized PDF. We'll explain what we mean by those terms. Secondly, we're going to look at printing and mailing specifically, and the kinds of complex re-engineering, sorting processes that you need to adapt PDF for modern inkjet presses. And thirdly, we're going to talk about PDF for digital delivery, including security, authenticity, and of course, accessibility. And what we're doing is taking all of those topics, and I hope we're going to sequence them into something that's readily consumable. So I'm going to hand over now to Laurie Charlwood, who's going to show us some of the good and the bad, perhaps not the ugly, but the good and the bad of PDF, and general techniques for ensuring that PDF is well structured for downstream processes. And I think, Laurie, you're going to be showing us an awful lot of Adobe Acrobat today. Am I right?
That is correct. That's correct, Tim. So if you care to stop sharing your screen, I will take control. Okay, so this is a typical 9-page mobile bill, which comprises summary, terms, conditions, cool details, etc. Many utility bills follow similar layouts and design principles. As we zoom in, we can begin to see that something's not quite right. The characters are a bit blurry, and this becomes more obvious the further we zoom in. So what's wrong? This document is in fact a single image, as you can see when I select it. The individual elements cannot be selected. There is very little processing and optimization that can be done with this document. You need to use OCR to extract the content and recreate the PDF object structure. This is the same 9-page stock document. However, this time, as we zoom in, the fonts remain smooth. Why is that? Well, we can see that we have fonts referenced. The PDF is a series of text and image objects rather than a single picture. These fonts are from the Adobe Base 14 fonts, which means they are supplied by a conforming reader and do not need to be included into the file. This leads to small file sizes. However, I would draw your attention to the bottom of the page here, the line that starts ATL, 8 ATL, ATL. It's in the Base 14 Courier font. In this example, notice how the characters are drawn slightly differently. These glyphs, as they are known, actually belong to the OCR-A font, which we can see here is embedded in the document. These fonts are the actual fonts that the document author used, and the document is exactly as the author intended. The use of the Adobe Base 14 fonts is a compromise to reduce file size, and it sometimes comes at the expense of document fidelity. It can take a trained eye and high zoom levels to identify the differences. So the technique is valid, just not in this case.
So Laurie, you can look at all of this stuff in Adobe Acrobat. You don't need any other tooling to do this. Is that right?
That's right. I'm just using the Adobe Reader. That's freely available from their website. Nothing sophisticated. Later on, I'll show a snippet of a PDF file as viewed within Notepad on a Windows machine. So these are two simple tools that enable you to quickly understand a PDF file.
Now, I'm also seeing at the top there the blue bar, which says it complies with PDF-A. What does that mean exactly?
This document has been prepared according to the PDF-A 1B standard, which is based upon the PDF 1.4 architecture. It is an archiving standard to guarantee that the document can be read correctly years later. In practice, this means that the fonts are embedded, color profiles included, and a number of technical requirements adhered to. Newer versions of this standard have been published, and they take advantage of the more advanced PDF architectures.
Are there other things that you can do in Adobe Reader?
Oh, absolutely. We can see here a 50,000 page file. This is a combination of the single statement that we've been looking around it, and I can move around it quite easy. I can jump to page 20,100, absolutely no problems. But when we look at the file size, we can see that it is 2 gigabytes in size. And if I try to look at the fonts, we can see how long it takes to process the pages, even though there are only 5 fonts in the file. This is a long time to wait for anything, especially for a printer that's sitting ready to go. But it needn't be that bad. Here we see the same 50,000 pages, and it's only 215 megabytes in size, a tenth of the size. The difference is that in this case, the concatenation process has resolved and removed identical fonts and resources rather than naively copying them from the input file into the output file multiple times. Finding your way around these large files would be difficult, but fortunately the PDF standard defines a number of indexing techniques that make it easy for people and machines to navigate the files. The first is the PDF bookmark. This enables different sections to be jumped to quickly and easily. See how we instantly jump to the account ending in 1014. Basically, a bookmark is a label and a page number, as shown in this text file that I extracted from this PDF document. For computers and advanced tooling, there are two other techniques that can be used. This is what's known as a page dictionary, where the metadata is included in a dictionary at the start of each page. The PDF here was opened using the simple text editor and the dictionary search for. This indexing technique is common in archiving applications. Similarly, the information can be stored in an XMP data structure at the head of each page.
So why do you need to include this kind of machine readable information in a PDF file? And actually, how does it get there?
Well, the indexing information allows you to split the file. This 50,000 page file we've been looking at contains 6,811 individual customer statements. If you want to access a single statement and present it to a customer without violating any data protection laws, you need to know where to find it. You can either split the file up into individual documents and consume 2 gigabytes of disk space, or you can access the pages when required using the index information. The choice is yours. Adding bookmarks is easy, and many tools support this. Adding the other indices is a little more specialized, but there are plenty of programming libraries and application toolkits that do support them. And with that, I'll hand you back to Tim.
That's great, Laurie. I think we can all see and appreciate, having seen that, how a well-organized and optimized PDF is an essential prerequisite for that kind of downstream processing, whether it's printing or archiving. And of course, size is important to archiving and print workflows, and the kind of metadata we're looking at, really what it's there to do is to help you find information again and to help you enrich information to make it more accessible, but make more of that a little bit later. Let's talk about printing first. And, you know, one of the things that we say every day is that the demands of modern print processes are manifold. Firstly, there's, you know, the volume problem. We've seen an example there of a 50,000 page file, and it's not unusual to find files of hundreds of thousands of pages composed for large print jobs. And those large amounts of data need to be processed and printed quickly. And the printer needs to be able to rip the PDF and do so at speeds that prevent the printer from clutching. And that needs well-optimized PDF. Secondly, there's the issue of tracking mail pieces through the system so that we can order that we've actually printed and mailed everybody who was in the original batch, and if necessary, handle any reprints that might need to occur as part of the process. Then there's the need to present documents to the mailing company in what we call in the UK walk sort order. So in other words, sequencing, splicing and dicing the incoming batches to form properly sorted batches. And then we need to be able to ensure our documents can be enveloped, and that means adding the appropriate inserter codes for the inserted devices. And, you know, I could go on and on and on. There are so many things to consider that we'd probably run out of time. But Laurie, I know you have a few very choice examples to show us that are a good cross-section of these kinds of challenges.
That's right. Here we have the 50,000 page document. It's presented as two columns of 25,000 pages so that they could be printed on a wide roll-fed printer, typically an inkjet printer. You'll notice how we've added production control barcodes in the right-hand margin, and these will be guillotined off post-printing. Previously, the domain of specialist software and integration with printer reps, we are seeing many companies seeking to do this manipulation further upstream with PDF inputs. The order of the documents and the pages is determined by an external file, and the sortation is done to meet the postal optimization requirements and the print production processing requirements. Many times these requirements lead to a non-intuitive sequence of documents when they are laid out on the paper. Once you start changing the contents of the document by manipulating the PDF, be it for rearrangement or for actual editing, you need to be able to check that the output is as you expected. For that, you need comparison tools to assist the Mark I eyeball. Here we can see the highlighted spelling mistake on the left-hand side, communications rather than communications. The whole string is highlighted as it's a single PDF string object within the file. We can also see the change in the font color on the build date from red to black. And if I zoom right in, we can see how on the right hand side the fonts start to get blurry as we saw before. And this is the font on the right hand side is the Type 3 raster font compared to the Type 1 vector font on the left hand side. The Pro Quick Compare tool that I used to create this output has an option to highlight pixel level differences in the fonts, but I didn't use it. Enough about increasing use of PDF within high volume printing environments and how they need to be manipulated and controlled and managed and compared. It's back to Tim to talk about some digital topics.
So I think the great thing about the demo you're showing, Laurie, is we're actually getting to see lots of different PDF features, one after the other, in context with the same source material. And I hope what everybody who's viewing is beginning to see is how, despite the visual characteristics being identical, actually the features of PDF we're taking advantage of change dramatically case by case. Now, our final demonstration section is looking at PDF as a vehicle for electronic delivery and how you solve problems like authentication, encryption, archiving with PDF-A, and even redaction in some circumstances. And then I think Laurie's going to end with a demonstration of how PDF UA, universal accessibility, can be used to enrich the semantics of a PDF and make it suitable for assistive technology. Back to you, Laurie.
This document has been signed. The signature panel tells us this, but there's also a warning about the certification, the fact that it's unknown. Let's have a look at this. So it tells us that the document has not been modified since it was certified. No one has been in and made changes, accidentally or otherwise. This is clearly excellent news, and the recipient is assured that the correct content has been delivered. But who sent it? The warning says that the signer's identity is unknown because it's not included in my list of trusted certificates, and none of its parent certificates are trusted certificates. This is a bit of a mouthful, but basically it says it can't be certain who created the document. There's a reason for this. I created my own certificate authority and created my own certificate and used that to sign this document. And for some reason, Adobe doesn't automatically trust me. These are the foundation techniques within PDF upon which sophisticated digital signature systems are built.
Okay, so that's authenticity. What about redaction and hiding information, Laurie?
Okay, so if we look at the bottom of this document, we can see how the name and address has been removed. And we can confirm this if we search for Kalima. We can see we find it at the top of the first page. We would expect to find it in the address block, but it has gone. The address has been removed completely. But there's no black rectangle, I hear you say. Well, a black rectangle is just a black image that we've added to the document to give the effect that you see in the classic examples. Again, in this example, we can go look for the surname Caldedo. We find it at the start of the page, and the next time we find it is at page 2. It has been removed from the address. With good quality tools, this is how redaction should work. The text must not be findable by any method. And as Tim said, to conclude, I'm just going to look at an accessible document. There are many standards and guidance statements about the accessibility of documents, especially when they are provided through or as part of a website. One of these standards is WCAG 2.1. The Web Accessibility Standard. This has a clause that requires that a document can reflow to a zoom level of 400%. We can activate reflow within Adobe Reader by pressing Ctrl+4. It's an option on the zoom menu. We have a problem. Adobe Reader is saying that the documents can't be reflowed. So when we zoom to 400%, we see that we focus on the top left-hand corner of the page, and we use the scroll bars and the mouse to move around as we are used to. This is very common with PDF documents, where the standard was initially designed to support page layouts and does not make the document easy to navigate with assistive tools. An accessible document has additional logical information for those technologies such as screen readers and braille displays to guide them. It's a credit to the PDF standard that it continues to support requirements such as accessibilities as they evolve and mature and we become more conscious of their needs. In this example, we can see how the text immediately reflows to the size of my screen. And when I zoom to 400%, the text increases in size and reverts to a single column. And that's because this document is correctly tagged with a logical reading order that enables reflow and the use of assistive technologies. There's a lot more to accessibility and the logical content of PDF documents. PDF UA is a comprehensive standard and continues to be updated. And with that, I will conclude my demonstration and hand you back to Tim.
Thanks, Laurie. That was a fantastic demonstration. I really appreciate that. And really shows, I think, some of the sort of workflow elements we were talking about and the common things that occur in those different processes. So it remains for me to reflect upon our theme today, which, if you recall, was optimizing PDF for print, digital, and accessible purposes. And I think we've shown some fascinating examples of how PDF can be tuned to those specific use cases. Now, I'm permitted, as this is the end of the presentation, to provide you with a brief, if you like, advertisement for Crawford Technologies. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, we're actually a Canadian, Toronto headquartered software company. We operate globally, and as you might expect, we have a lot to say about PDF, and we have a lot of technologies for PDF and helping with PDF workflows. Our Crawford Tech DTE platform is designed to help with lots of these kinds of processes. And so it supports multiple formats. So PDF is a primary format, but also AFP, Metacode, PostScript, PCL. It assists in transformation between the different formats, but equally can transform from like formats, PDF to PDF, to optimize and tune the PDF for a particular process. It helps with indexing and splitting. So you've seen some of the techniques there for embedding metadata, so PPDs and XMP. And there are lots of techniques like that in the different formats, as well as external techniques like CSV, as well as visible indexes on the pages that you're handling. We support re-engineering, and you've seen some complex re-engineering in that process, things like barcoding, handling the pages, laying out the pages, n-upness to make sure that it's suitable for example, continuous feed inkjet printers. And we've seen a little bit of what happens with concatenation and resequencing, an increasing need where you've got lots of small print jobs and they need to be combined and then put into a walk sort order. And it doesn't end there. There's all the digital qualities that we've seen. So that includes things like security, adding signatures, encryption, passwords. There's the qualities perspective, which is making sure that we're not making breaking changes to our documents as part of the composition process. And redaction, which is important, particularly for payment card industry, data security standards, where people in call centers aren't permitted to look at confidential customer information. And that information, which is embedded in the original document, needs to be suppressed when it's viewed by an operative of that kind. And we've looked at archive. PDFA in particular is such an important standard in long-term archiving and records management. And we're seeing that in all kinds of sectors, including government, financial services, banking, insurance, and telco and media. And finally, accessibility. Accessibility is becoming really important because as the web is maturing, we need to make sure that all of our PDFs have the kind of semantic tagging in them necessary for them to be used by everybody on the web and for those using assistive technology. And with everything that PDF can do, who knows what's next? The standard continues to evolve. And that's one of the most exciting things about being in the PDF community, is that we're part of something that's living and breathing. And the Crawford Tech DTA platform obviously keeps up with all of those developments and innovations in the PDF standard. So whether you're a print service provider trying to optimize your print workflows on inkjet presses, for example, or if you're a bank trying to optimize digital delivery of statements and letters, or you're an insurance company that needs to provide policy documents that are accessible to the blind and partially sighted, Crawford Tech, I hope you can appreciate from the presentation today, has a unique perspective and has a platform that can help. So with that said, we're going to move on to a question and answer session, and I'll be joined by Laura again to answer those questions.
Thank you, Tim. All right, let's see, the question pod is open here, so please feel free to ask your questions of Tim and Lori. And I have a question here. Let's see. So is it possible to generate PDFs with print, digital, and accessible qualities and avoid the need for different flavors?
Well, that's a good question, Duff. Yes, it is possible to do that. And I guess what we tend to see is different processes needing to produce fairly specific outputs, because if you generate something of a sufficiently high quality for print, it might be quite heavy in terms of its storage footprint for instance, its storage density. And so trying to incorporate every sort of PDF feature into a single run or batch is entirely possible, but often undesirable. So I guess, the kinds of things you've seen today are all possible in a single document, but it's often the case that we just need to tune for some of the different use cases.
Mm-hmm. So one of the questioners asks, how can I find out what kind of PDF it is, say a PDF A1A or some other such? What application do I open it up in to figure out what type of PDF it is?
Okay, that's a good question. I think we saw on the screen a little bit earlier, there's a blue bar that appears when which identifies a document as being PDF A. And I'm struggling to remember, Laurie, the specific menu option, but you are able to see some of the details of the particular version of the PDFA standard. Which is that, Laurie? Remind me.
I can't remember because I just searched the text file. I just open the file in Notepad and go look for the PDFA ID area, which is RDF metadata sitting nice and viewable within the files. So I just go look at that and it says PDFA conformance level A or B.
Well, there we go. So the answer is yes, open in Notebook, I guess.
Sure. So next question. So why would an organization use accessible PDF when they have accessible HTML websites?
So that is a really interesting one, Duff. And it's interesting when you look at what people are doing with accessibility on their websites at the moment as to how they're approaching that. And I'd have to say that we see two slightly different approaches. So in North America, there is accessible HTML on websites, but there's also a great deal of use of accessible PDF to provide, for example, accessible archives of customer information. And we're not seeing that quite as much in Europe. But I think the reasons for using accessible PDF are very clear, because if your composition processes for customer communications and customer experience are generating things for print, people, I think, reasonably have an expectation that when they get that information from your archive again, or when you provide them with a copy of that information, it's going to look the same as how you originally delivered it. Indeed, there are quite a few regulations around that say that should be the case. So the page and the sort of page layout the PDF supports is important in those kinds of use cases. Equally, though, accessible PDF kind of gives you some of the benefits of HTML in terms of its zooming, its your ability to see the document in different ways. And I think it's particularly for some sectors like banking and insurance and utilities, the accessible PDF route is probably a more popular option.
Yep. Okay. So let's see. Next question here is: so you mentioned at some point the document decomposition. Could you explain a little bit more about what you mean by that?
Yeah. So we talk a lot when we're talking particularly about printing and archiving workflows. We're talking about indexing as a process, and what Laurie showed was taking particular fields, a customer number or a date or an address detail, and taking that out of the document. And so I see that as a form of decomposition. And a lot of these documents on the other side of the coin are composed. So they go through composition tools that produce these very irregularly shaped documents out the other end. And decomposition is simply the reverse side of that coin. It's going into the documents again and extracting the things of meaning. And typically that's the semantic structure. And that's one of the things I love about PDF UA is it's a way to express the semantics of a PDF in much the same way as you get in HTML, and to get back to the original decomposed text that forms that page layout in the document. So I'm not sure whether I answered the question in the end there, Duff. Did I?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's reversing composition and recognizing components of the semantic components of the documents. That makes some sense, at least to me.
And just to add to that, I think the process that we're used to in the industry is doing that in the simple cases, which is, as I say, a name, an address, a customer number. What accessibility adds to that is the need to do that at a deep level for the whole document. And that's where things become a little bit more complex, because you've obviously got to understand and interpret what can often be quite complex layouts of these documents. So that's the sort of step change, I think, in going from simple indexing to full decomposition and semantic understanding.
Right. So let's see. Perhaps the last question I see here: what laws govern accessible document production?
Well, that is a good question. So in North America, there are laws like the Americans with Disability Act. There are equivalent laws in Canada, like the AODA. There are also, of course, rules like Section 508 used by the US government. So the situation in North America is very clear, and there's quite a degree of enforcement around the use of accessible information, whether that be sort of print and PDF or whether it's the web. In Europe, there are equally some very good laws. In the UK, we have the Disability and Discrimination Act, originally came into force in 2000, updated in 2009 based on the UN Declaration on Human Rights for People with Disabilities. And there are other variations of that in many European laws. So there's not one country in Europe that doesn't have some kind of legislation that deals with how you provide accessible information. And that should have an impact on how people produce PDFs. The final things in Europe that are coming up, there is the European directive, which affects ICT in government organizations, that requires, for example, government websites and mobile applications to be fully accessible. And in fact, there's just been a recent deadline on the 23rd of September, and there's a further deadline for mobile applications coming up early in the new year. And there are further European standards in the pipeline that will require commercial organizations to provide equivalent service to ordinary consumers in the commercial market. So comparatively, I'd say Europe is a little bit weaker in terms of the legislation than the US at the moment, certainly quite a bit weaker and in enforcement terms. And that's probably why we see more activity around accessible PDF in places like Canada and the United States.